Hi, y'all, and welcome to tonight's live stream. We are covering an unbelievably interesting case, and it's in the middle of trial. In 2014, FSU law professor Dan Markel was murdered in his own driveway by two hitmen. Did his ex-wife, Wendi Adelson, have anything to do with it? What about his ex-mother-in-law, Donald Adelson? Did she have anything to do with it? Well, so far, neither of them has been charged. But surprisingly, one member of Wendi Adelson's family has been charged. Her brother, Charlie, an otherwise respected dentist, periodontist in South Florida. He's on trial right now in a Tallahassee courtroom, accused of hiring the two hitmen who killed Dan Markel. So happy Wednesday, everybody. I have worked like crazy to try to make the connection better than it was on our last live stream. I now have a 100-foot cable that is running out the door, down the hall, through the stairs, down the stairs, through the dining room, into the living room, and plugged into the router. So hopefully it's going to be better. Let me know. I really am hopeful that this is going to work. But happy Wednesday, everybody. You've made it halfway through the week plus. We are on our way to weekend. For nearly 10 years, the state of Florida has doggedly, if slowly, pursued the people who killed law professor Dan Markel, a Harvard Law graduate. They put so far 3 people in prison. And I'll just give us, since we're kind of new to this case here on the channel, let me go ahead and give you just kind of the quick refresher. Dan Markel is the man who was murdered in his driveway, the law professor. 3 people have been convicted. Luis Rivera and Sigfredo Garcia are accused of being the hitmen. According to the state, they were hired by Catherine Medbanowa, who has also been convicted. Then Catherine was dating Charlie Adelson, the dentist, and the brother of Wendi. The Adelsons are shown at the top of the screen. Wendi Adelson is the one whose testimony we're going to listen to tonight, and I'll explain how there can be testimony when the trial hasn't started. Charlie Adelson, who is the one on trial for hiring the 2 hitmen, he's on trial for murder. Donna Adelson, the mother of Wendi and Charlie, and Harvey Adelson, the father of Wendi and Charlie. That's sort of the people you need to know in order to understand what's happening in the case. Now, the question that has dogged this case from the beginning is whether or not the Adelsons were involved, and would the state be able to convict any of them if they were involved? Will they reach back to Wendi Adelson? We don't know the answer to that yet. We've got a lot to cover, and so I don't want to take too long. I am just going to hop right in. Know that I am really grateful to all of you who subscribe, and really grateful if you hit the like button. So let's start with just a quick trial update. We have a jury. A jury has been selected. They brought in 900 jurors, which is extraordinary, and went through 3 full days of examining them, asking them questions, trying to make sure they had a jury that could be fair and impartial. And now they have seated 12 plus 3 alternates, and that will be the jury for the case, which is expected to last 3 weeks. Now, there was not a lot we got to see during jury selection. For the most part, the camera was either no sound or pointed at the carpet, or had the sound turned so far down that nothing could be heard. Or sometimes they would just show a graphic that indicated you aren't getting to see this period. So there was not a lot that we could see. We do know that the Adelson family has hired attorney jury consultants. And from some of the reporting back on that, they're sort of aggressive. One of them was put in charge of interfacing with the jury during the voir dire or voir dire, depending on where you're from in the country, which is the period of time when the lawyers get to ask the potential jurors, questions and determine whether they think they would be fair or unfair. During that process, normally the attorney who is going to try the case wants to be upfront and interacting with the jury, because it's your chance to make a connection. It's your chance to get to know them, let them get to know you. But Katie Koulady, and I've asked her to be on the show later this week, so hopefully we'll be able to work that out. Katie Koolady, who's been in the courtroom, says that she felt like she had some really good observations, I thought. One of the things she said was that because this very strong, dominant person was doing the interfacing, but it's just the attorney consultant, not the person who's going to try the case. As a result, there wasn't that connection with the jury between the actual trial lawyer and the jury. And there also was a little bit of a problem, she felt like, with the main attorney looking kind of weak, being a more retiring, quieter person than the people who were actually interacting with the jury. So I thought those were interesting observations. Now, typically a jury consultant is hired in order to make sure that the people selected are, to the extent possible, ones who will be favorable to whichever side is selected, the juror consultant. And so that's what the point of that would be. Now, let's talk about Wendi Adelson's testimony. We're about to hear it, and you may think, well, wait a minute. How can there possibly be testimony when there hasn't even been the trial yet? We're going to be starting opening tomorrow. So how is there testimony? Well, the answer is that this is actually the third trial. Luis Rivera, one of the two hitmen, pled guilty. Then he testified in a trial against Sigfredo Garcia and Catherine Mbanawa. That in that first trial, Sigfredo was convicted, but Catherine was not. It was a hung jury. So the state retried it. And in that second trial, she was actually convicted that time and then sentenced to life in prison. So at this stage, we have what's going to happen in this trial is not known. Nobody's appeared yet. There are no witnesses, no testimony in this trial. And yet, we know a lot about what the witnesses will say because there have been two prior trials. So, in fact, Wendi Adelson, the ex-wife of Dan Markel, testified at those trials. And so I wanted to go through her testimony. This is just from one of the trials. This will be from the trial where she was testifying. It was only Catherine Mbanawa. That was the only person on trial. Sigfredo Garcia had been convicted in the first trial. So this is her testimony from that. Now, will she be coming to trial here in the case against her own brother? I'm going to talk about that more at the end. I'm just going to say, I think she comes. I think it's pretty likely that she comes. I think she thinks that it's not too harmful to her and that it won't be a problem for her brother if she comes. We'll talk about that as we look at what she's likely to testify about when she comes. Now, the other reason I think she's pretty likely to come is that there was quite the blow up over whether Mom and Dad Adelson, Donna and Harvey, would come. Would they come? Were they going to take the fifth? Were they going to submit to questioning before they got on the stand? All of that ended up being a big dispute, and ultimately they've decided not to come. So there hasn't been the same sort of dispute with Wendi, and therefore my guess is that she's likely to come. Neither Donna nor Harvey has testified at the prior two trials. But remember, there will be much more evidence this time pinpointed, aimed specifically at the brother. This time around, that will be a difference. Charlie Adelson is on trial now, and so the testimony will be geared directly toward him. So it's a different target. In addition, remember that Wendi Adelson has been named in a pleading, not charged, just mentioned in a pleading as a conspirator, as someone the state believes was involved. So for Wendi Adelson, there carries some significant risk every time that she shows up and starts talking. So what I want to do is analyze her past testimony and just see what she had to say so we can learn a lot more about the case. Now, it is sort of an unusual situation because normally when a witness comes, one side wanted the witness to be there because the testimony is favorable to that side. The other side didn't want the witness to be there and has that witness on cross-examination, where they're allowed to ask more pointed questions that would just have a yes or no answer. But in this case, weirdly, in the trial against Catherine Mbanawa, both sides were really fairly hostile. The state called Wendi Adelson. The state called her and asked her to show up and testify, but it was really a conflict because the state really does believe that she likely was involved based on some of the pleadings and some of the statements they made in court. So at the same time, of course, Catherine Mbanawa's attorney also had her own cross-examination and had a lot of reason to blame her instead of Catherine, or her instead of Charlie, either one. So now it was an hour and a half plus, and I've cut it to about 20 minutes just so we can zip through it fairly quickly. It's the highlights, obviously. Now, it cannot be used against her per se. This is Wendi Adelson testifying, but what can't happen is if she's ever charged, they can't bring this in and say, isn't it true that on such and such a day at trial you said this? They can't do that, but it tells us a lot about what it is that she's going to say. She had a use immunity that allowed her to testify without it being used directly against her. So let's put it up and
refresh your recollection about what your mother felt was the most important non-negotiable term of your divorce.
It does.
Okay, and what was that?
That was relocation.
Did your mom ever refer to your husband as an asshole,
Yes.
a bully,
Yes.
a zealot?
A religious zealot. Yes.
let me stop for just a minute and explain too. What they're talking about here at this juncture is the idea that Donna Adelson really, really hated Wendi's ex-husband and was very angry with him and may have sort of been at the center of the Adelsons' decision. This is what the state is going to suggest, at the center of the Adelsons' decision to kill or have murdered Dan. And therefore, she's saying, what was it your mother really wanted in the divorce? And saying, well, what she really wanted was for me to move to Miami with the grandkids, because she wanted a relationship with the grandkids. And Dan and I lived up in Tallahassee. We were 4 hours away, 400 miles anyway away. I guess it'd be more than 4 hours. We were 400 miles away. And so she wanted us close by. She wanted us to move. And that was the number one thing that mattered to her.
A jackass,
Yes.
a religious extremist.
Yes.
What types of things did your mother suggest that you could do to try to coerce or acquire the ability to relocate your kids to Miami?
She suggested that I could change the religion
Of who?
of my children
And why would that affect the relocation effort?
because religion was so important to Danny that would be a real hot button thing.
Okay. And did she ever suggest that you could bribe your husband to allow the relocation?
She did.
And how much money did she suggest that she and the family would be willing to put up for such a bribe? How much money was your family willing to bribe Dan Markel to let you move to?
They said that as $1 million, which would be $333,000 each.
And who are the each?
My mom, my dad, and Charlie.
Relocate your kids to Miami.
So just think about that for a minute. The mother, Donna Adelson, who is also in the state's eyes, at least, a suspect, the prosecution is going to have a theme. Mama Bear was upset. Donna Adelson was upset, and so upset that even though the Adelsons themselves were Jewish, she thought that her daughter, Wendi, ought to use the idea that she would convert her children to Christianity or Catholicism so that it would just upset the husband, the ex-husband, and maybe that would be the trigger that would let them relocate. All right, we'll keep them Jewish, but we're going to have to be able to move to South Florida near my parents. And then they also were, according to what she testified, willing to pay $1 million just to make sure that the kids moved closer to the parents.
She suggested that I could change the religion
Of who?
of my children
And why would that affect the relocation effort?
because religion was so important to Danny that would be a real
Yep, I hit the
hot
button. Sorry, we'll
And
move
who
it
are
forward
the
a little.
each?
My mom, my dad, and Charlie.
How long
Okay.
did you stay in Tallahassee after your husband was killed?
I'm sorry, Miss Kappelman. I stayed for a few days.
All right, so
And as soon as one of the prosecution's themes is that there was really a desire within the Adelson family to let Wendi and the grandkids move to South Florida near the grandparents. And as soon as Dan Markel was murdered, they were out of there. It was a matter of only a few more days that Wendi and the kids spent in Tallahassee before they were down in Florida, in South Florida, permanently near the grandparents. The idea is this worked out real well for the Adelsons. It worked out well for Wendi, Charlie, who was apparently willing to pay $333,000 to make sure his nephews lived near him. And it worked out well for the grandparents. So as soon as Dan Markel died, they were out of there. And now we're going to start to get a little bit into how bitter it was in this divorce between Dan Markel and Wendi. Just how very, very serious it was. When Wendi actually went to the court and asked to be allowed to move her kids from Tallahassee down to South Florida near the grandparents. And the court said, no, you both work at FSU. You both live here. The dad loves the kids. There's absolutely no reason for me to allow you to single-handedly take the kids down there so that he loses his relationship with them. And that had happened just shortly before Dan Markel was killed.
How did your mom take the news that you were not going to be able to relocate?
She was very upset.
Right. I want to talk a little bit about the litigation that continued after your divorce was final. Was there a motion to enforce the marital settlement agreement and hold Dan Markel in contempt of court filed by you?
Yes.
And a few months later, did he respond with a counter motion to enforce the marital settlement agreement's final provisions, alleging some violations that he said you made on the marital settlement agreement?
Yes.
And he accuses you of various things, lying about your financial affidavit and things like that. Would you agree?
He does make those accusations. They were completely baseless, but yes.
This motion was filed by Dan Markel on March 26th of 2014, so shortly before his death. Okay, what was that motion?
Former husband's counter motion for enforcement of MSA on parenting issues and motion for contempt and sanctions.
And in that motion, did he allege that you were violating the marital settlement agreement in a variety of ways?
Yes, it looks like he did.
Including failing to facilitate communication between he and the boys, failing to keep him informed of where his kids are, failure to communicate about parenting decisions like the kids' schooling, diet, and extracurricular activities. In that filing, Dan Markel alleges that your mother is disparaging him to the children, correct?
That is correct.
And he was seeking a court order saying she couldn't have contact with the kids unless there was another adult present, correct?
I see that here. I don't think I took it seriously at the time, so it didn't really lodge in my memory.
Did your mom take it seriously?
No.
So you can see from this testimony how incredibly bitter this dispute is between Wendi Adelson and Dan Markel. And it's now hit straight at home at the mother, at Donna Adelson. And that's what the state is going to be pushing here, because Dan Markel was not just asking for contempt and sanctions against Wendi, which was significant in and of itself, and potentially, given her legal status, could have affected either her job or her standing in the legal community. I've heard people speculate that maybe it could cause her to be disbarred. I find that kind of questionable, but I'm not really sure what the allegations were, so it would depend on that, I suppose. But from not just from Wendi's standpoint was this ugly and really, really ugly. Now it's also really ugly from the standpoint of the mother-in-law, Donna Adelson, because Dan Markel is asking that the mother-in-law not be allowed to be with the children unless it's for supervised visits. And he's saying the reason is because Donna Adelson is disparaging him, is telling the kids bad things about him. And he says to the court, that's not fair. And I resent that. So I want to thank Joan Rodriguez. Thank you very much.
Was your brother Charlie, or is your brother Charlie, protective of you?
He is, yeah.
Did you discuss your marital problems with him back during the time of 2013, 2014?
I did.
Is it fair to say that in the time frame leading up to the murder of your ex-husband that your brother did not like your ex?
I think it's fair to say. I mean, I also think it's fair to say he wasn't particularly concerned with it. He was leading his own life and not really focused on mine.
But your mom was really focused on yours.
My mom was focused.
And notice again that they pulled in Donna Adelson. They have pulled her in and they are talking once again about how Donna Adelson is the one truly affected and truly worried about this. But she's not on trial, right? Remember, Charlie Adelson is. But that's why the state is asking about this connection to Charlie. Isn't it true that you were telling Charlie that you were having a hard time, that Dan Markel was treating you unfairly? You were filling his ear, talking to him all the time about how poorly you were being treated by Dan Markel. And that's why the state will say he went out and hired hitmen to kill Dan Markel. Now, you can see that Wendi Adelson says, I didn't take it all that seriously. This is just a court pleading. It's just people fighting, and the court isn't going to take it seriously. That's just stuff that happens in the middle of a divorce. So it's not really a big deal. So, and I want to say thanks to M. Meyer. I really appreciate it.
Focused on mine.
Did your brother ever mention hiring a hitman to kill your ex-husband?
He never mentioned hiring a hitman. He told one bad off-color joke where he said he had bought me a TV when I got divorced and said it was a present, and made a very bad joke and bad taste that it was cheaper than hiring a hitman.
And was
But no,
that, I'm sorry, I cut you off.
Oh, that's okay.
What else were you going to say?
I think that was it.
All right. Was that a joke that your brother made one time or more than one time?
He has a tendency to repeat himself, so everything he says multiple times.
Do you know how many times he said it?
I have no idea, but definitely twice at least.
And it was your understanding that he had not made any actual efforts to hire the hitman?
Yes.
But you did get a TV as a divorce present.
I did get a TV.
Now, let's just think for a minute about how unbelievably off-color that joke was and how incredibly poorly timed or positioned it was when, in fact, Dan Markel really truly was killed by hitman. What are the chances of that? So it's an exceptionally bad joke and exactly what happened. And that's why it's so powerful for the state. Now, she is not the only person who is able to testify about this particular bad joke. So if she didn't come, the state has other ways to get it in, I believe. But it is very powerful evidence against her brother, Charlie, just because of the context, that it's that serious a statement, joke, if you will, and it actually happened. So it's hard to believe that it was really, truly a joke.
Were you involved in the plot to kill your husband?
Absolutely not.
Did you have knowledge of the plot to kill your husband?
No.
But you suspected that your family was involved?
No, I did not suspect that my family was involved.
Did you mention in your interview with law enforcement that you suspected that your family could be behind this?
I think I speculated about lots of things during the 6 hours I spent with law enforcement without an attorney present trying to help them solve this murder. Yes, I said all kinds of things.
All right, and one of the things you said was that your family very much disliked him and that you thought it was possible that someone had done this on your behalf, unbeknownst to you.
I did say I thought someone might have done this on my behalf, yes.
Notice how there is, she's denying that she said this to law enforcement, sort of, but she kind of comes around to saying, okay, yeah, maybe I said that, but I just was talking. I was just saying things. It certainly is very serious that when first confronted with law enforcement, one of the first things that popped into her head was, wonder if my family did this. It's not necessarily something most people would think about. And yet apparently it was something she thought about at the time. I'm sure law enforcement can testify to the fact that she said it. They in fact have a recording of her. So she sort of admits that she has said that, and it's kind of clear that she must have said that. Her denial of that is really weak and sort of not specific. It's just, oh, well, I was saying a bunch of crazy things, not something that would persuade a jury. It's strange enough that it was one of her first thoughts.
Did you or your children benefit financially from your husband's death?
Absolutely not.
Did your husband have a life insurance policy?
He did have a life insurance policy. I do know that his sister's the custodian of that life insurance policy, and I pay taxes on that money every year, but we don't We don't receive any of it.
What was the value of it at the time of your husband's death?
It was $1 million,
Not $2 million?
$1 million for each child.
$2 million. All right. And did you believe prior to your husband's murder that you were the custodian of that money for the benefit of the boys?
No, we were divorced, so I was the custodian while we were married. But once we were divorced, I was no longer the custodian.
So you were aware that he had designated someone else to do
Yes.
that job? You didn't inquire through your attorney about challenging the designation of the sister as the custodian of that money?
I wasn't trying to challenge the designation, no.
Now, I've cut off additional questions from the state asking her about all of his assets and all of the money that came or didn't come to her through the death of Dan Markel, her ex-husband. Her testimony here is that she has no financial benefit, and you can see why the state would be interested in that. It's always an issue that they want to ask about and go to. You think about the Lori Vallow Daybell case that we covered and some of the financial interests that Lori Vallow Daybell was said to have in her ex-husband's. Corey, or in one case, her husband. And you think about Corey Richens, who is accused of having, for example, taken out secret life insurance policies on her husband, who then died. So one of the things that the state is doing is trying to figure out and ask about financial reasons that Wendi would have. Now, in this particular case, it doesn't seem like they have a lot of information that directly connects Wendi to direct benefit. It does appear that the boys received benefits that are apparently being held by her ex-sister, Wendi's ex-sister-in-law, their aunt. Let's keep going.
Did you change their legal names about a month or so after the murder? When were their names
About
changed?
a year after.
Okay, and that was when they were legally changed, July 6, 2015?
I don't
Does that sound
remember
right?
the date, but if you have it, that sounds correct.
Okay, so they were legally changed on that date, but just a month or so after the murder, when you were enrolling them in school, is when they effectively had their names changed.
That is not true.
And what did you change their names from and to?
I changed their last name from their father's last name to mine.
From Markel to Adelson.
That is correct.
And did you also drop the middle name of one of your boys that was a tribute to his paternal side?
It was a tribute to both families.
Did you drop it?
I did. I lost an honor to both families that day, yes.
Now, you can just see how incredibly bad that looks. It just is a terrible look that briefly after the murder, she tried to separate her boys from their past, from their dad, by changing their names. And that's what the state is trying to suggest. The state's trying to say she did everything she could to just chop off that half of them that belonged to the Markel side, that belonged to Dan, their father, and instead change their legal names. And the state is suggesting that she did it within a month, as far as when she registered them for school, and she's trying to say, no, I didn't really do it for another year. And she's going to explain why she did that a little bit more on cross-examination. You'll hear that when we get to that spot. And she also says, well, although I also changed one of the middle names, which really seems strange, it kind of honored both sides. And that is particularly problematic because her reasoning for changing this, as she's going to explain later, has to do with fear for them. But their middle name wouldn't really be known in the public. And so it's unlikely that that would have caused them any problems. So we'll get to that in a little bit in the cross.
Do you want the culpable parties in this murder held accountable?
Absolutely.
And even if it involves your own family?
Absolutely.
And did you tell law enforcement something different in that interview about the culpability of your family?
I'm sure while I sat for 6 hours completely traumatized that I said all kinds of things.
All right, and was one of the things you said while you sat for 6 hours completely traumatized that you wanted the culpable parties held accountable unless it was your family?
I don't believe I phrased it like that, and I think you're taking my words out of context, but sure.
Now, frankly, it seems to me it probably is pretty accurate that most people in their heart of hearts would feel like, I want people held accountable, but not really my family. Maybe they could get off. I think that's probably a pretty common feeling. But one of the things that's going to be a problem for Wendi, and hence for Charlie is it sounds like she said something to law enforcement and now she's backing away from that. She's trying to pull away from that and suggest that no, she's being completely fair-minded about whether anyone, including her brother Charlie, goes to prison, because what she cares about is the right result. Now we're going to move over into the cross-examination. This is by Catherine McBanawa's lawyer. So we've now heard, I've given you the short clips from what the prosecution asked. And now we're going to look at what Catherine McBanawa, the defendant's lawyer, asked. And you'll be intrigued. I tried to cut out duplication, but they have the same themes because both of them want to see the Adelsons being the ones who are in trouble for this.
Professor Markel, he was a great father, wasn't he?
He was a very good father, yes.
Those boys were his world, right?
As well as his work, yes.
And they adored him too, didn't they?
Absolutely.
Now, this marriage started to fall apart, right?
It did.
But there were problems from the very beginning, weren't there? Literally at the wedding.
There were problems before we got married.
In your wedding, at your wedding was the groom's family, the Markel family, and they are more strict than your family and friends about keeping kosher.
They do not keep kosher.
Wasn't that one of the problems in your marriage, that Professor Markel was very insistent about keeping kosher?
And just to clarify, if there's some question about this, kosher would be certain rules about eating that would be commonly known and part of the Jewish faith that both of these people, both of these families supposedly shared. But Dan Markel apparently had a stricter family in terms of their keeping kosher.
His kosher rules, but those are different than his family's.
So you're saying that it wasn't a problem at the wedding, that there were people from the groom's side of the family that were there that strictly keep kosher, that they were told that it was going to be kosher food, but it actually wasn't?
So there was a misunderstanding about whether the food was going to be kosher style or more in adherence with kosher law. There was a miscommunication about that.
So you had people that strictly keep kosher eating non-kosher food, which is a big deal.
That actually is not what happened. Danny was upset that it was kosher style and not strictly adhering to kosher law. So he was disappointed.
So the reason I think that the McBanawa team introduced this is just to show people that there were contentions between them early on, and that some of it seemed to stem from a sense of disrespect from the Adelson family toward the Markel family. They just didn't agree with them about some of these rules, and so the defense is trying to suggest. So they made sure that they did what they wanted to do, but sort of suggested that this would be kosher, which really upset people because to them it was a religious violation for them to eat this food. And they didn't know that they were violating their religious tenets and that there was this disconnect. And it was on a family level. And that's going to be important to what the state says.
Fast forward now to September 10th, 2012. Professor Markel, he's away on a business trip, right?
Yes.
He's in New York City at New York University, right?
I believe so, yes.
And he's doing a presentation. You text him at around 2:30 in the afternoon, right? Right before he's about to do the presentation.
I really don't remember.
But you do remember dropping the bomb on him, don't you? Telling him that you wanted a divorce.
So I did not drop a bomb on him. We'd been in therapy for several months beforehand where I told him several times I wanted a divorce.
You say it's not a bomb, but you agree with me that he begged you to reconsider.
He was very upset and yes, wanted me to reconsider, but...
In that phone call, he's begging you to reconsider. Please don't leave. Please don't break up our family, right?
He was very upset, yes.
And he was heartbroken. I mean, upset indicates that there was anger. What he was heartbroken, right?
That I decided to divorce him after telling him I would, yes.
Despite being at NYU for a presentation, he rushes home. He gets on the next flight, right?
I honestly don't remember if he got on the next flight, but he did come home quickly.
2:30 he finds out in New York. By 11 p.m. he's walking in the door to your old house at Trescott Drive, right?
I don't know.
But you do know that when he walks in the house what he finds. You know that, right?
Yes, I left him the papers.
You left the divorce papers on the bed, right?
Yes.
Half the furniture was gone.
Half the furniture was not gone.
A good amount of his stuff was gone.
Nothing of his was gone.
The boys' stuff was gone, right?
Some of the boys' things were gone. I'd taken enough so that I had for the boys, but no.
You were gone,
I was gone, yes.
and so were his boys.
His boys were not gone. He saw them the next day, and they would not have been awake if he's coming home at 11 p.m.
Let's stay on topic here.
I'd love to stay on topic.
When he walks in the door, the boys are not in the house, right?
Correct.
And you did not tell Professor Markel where you were taking the boys. He may have seen them the next day, but you did not let him know where you were going to be staying with his boys.
With our boys? Yes.
Now, this is another revealing story that the defense is presenting. The defense is saying, look at the way she treated Dan Markel. And as with just about any divorce, just about any story, there are going to be two sides to it. So the story the defense wants to tell is that when he was about to go into an important presentation, she sent him a text message right beforehand going, I'm divorcing you, throwing him off so he couldn't do his presentation as well. He came rushing home thinking he was going to be able to talk to her, maybe even talk her out of the divorce. And he gets home and finds she's taken some of his stuff, taken some of the boys' stuff, half the furniture. She'd been planning this and she was gone. And he didn't even know where the kids were at the time. So that's the story the defense has in this particular Madbanawa's defense. Now the story, and in this case, it'll be the state story, right? But the story that Wendi Adelson has is, no, that isn't how it was. We've been going through therapy for a while. I've been saying that I was headed toward divorce. I finally pulled the trigger. I decided, yep, I'm going to, bad pun there. I finally decided to go ahead and get the divorce. And I took the boys. It was late at night. He got to see them the next day. None of that was particularly serious. And there was nothing for him to be really upset about.
That's not all you took, is it?
Excuse me?
You two had a joint checking account at Schwab, right?
We did.
And you went into that account before you dropped the bomb, and you took out half of that account, right?
Correct.
Roughly $350,000.
Half, yes. Of our joint account.
$350,000.
I don't remember the amount, but yes.
You know that it was in the hundreds of thousands.
I really don't remember the amount, sir.
So the defense here is suggesting that there was both a money motive and also that Wendi Adelson was being underhanded. Now, that's something that the state will carry forward into this next trial against Charlie.
Marriages fall apart, right?
Yes.
But you complained constantly about it, didn't you?
No, I don't think I complained constantly.
To anyone that would listen.
No, that's not true.
You agree with me that you complained to the one person that would actually do something about it.
I don't understand what you're asking.
Your big brother, Charles Adelson, you complained to him about how bad Professor Markel was and how much you hated him and didn't want to be in a marriage with him.
I definitely talked to my brother about how unhappy I was in my marriage. If that's the question, then yes.
So now what we've got is the defense making the very argument that the state is going to make in Charlie Adelson's case. In this particular case, Catherine Madbanawa's attorney was trying to say she's not the one who arranged for the hit. Charlie Adelson arranged for the hit, and he had a really important motive. And that motive was he wanted to protect you. You were complaining and saying how bad Dan Markel was to you. And so you told your brother that, and he went and did something about it. Isn't that true? That is exactly what the state's theme is going to be in the case against Charlie Adelson.
Let's talk about your brother's jokes now. You don't deny that he joked about hiring a hitman.
He did.
You don't deny that he repeated this joke.
He did.
And he made this joke right before a hitman murdered Professor Markel.
I don't know that to be true.
Okay. He made the joke right before, and I'll leave out the hitman part, Professor Markel was killed.
He made the joke the morning that I talked to him. Yes.
Can you think of one person in this world that would actually hire two people to go kill Professor Markel other than your family? Ms. Adelson, please address me and answer the question.
I mean, I'm responsible for coming up with, that's the prosecutor's duty, no? To figure out who's responsible.
This joke is made right before Professor Markel is murdered, right?
The joke was made many times.
It was made right before Professor Markel was murdered, yes or no?
Yes.
Now, this is without question I would, at least I think, one of the two, I'll put it that way, one of the two most important pieces of evidence against Charlie Adelson, this joke that he made more than once in front of more than one person about how he was going to give her a TV because it was cheaper than hiring a hitman, but so close to home, given that Dan Markel was actually killed by a hitman. Now, in addition to that, both sides, the second worst fact I would say would be the Dolce Vita tape at the restaurant that was taken by an undercover FBI agent of a conversation between Charlie Adelson and Catherine Mabanawa. That would also be critically important evidence. And there are other pieces, but just throwing out there, those are two of the most important. Now, both sides are hitting this issue, the joke, in this trial. The state was interested, so was Catherine Mabanawa's attorney, because it's so important. And you can see that Wendy's approach is to admit that the joke happened, but try to soften the edges, that it was just a joke. And I really did get a TV. It wasn't like he said that and never gave me a TV. Therefore, he must have taken the money instead and put it on a hitman. That's going to be her argument. And next, they went through a long list of her resume, and I just wanted to remember to say that to you. So I left this one statement in. He went through a long list of her resume, which is impressive, both undergrad and she herself has a law school degree. And he went and had a year where she studied in the UK on a scholarship. So, and finally wound up with this question.
You're a smart woman, right?
I am a smart woman.
And the point of that was to say, jury, don't be fooled that this is a naive, innocent person sitting up here who had no idea that any of this was going on. Mabanawa's attorney was trying to say, this is someone who is gaming the system. She knows just how to testify. That will also be a theme in this coming trial.
I spoke to the police for 6 hours without anyone present. I signed over my cell phone, my car, my house, everything, my computer. What else do I have or know that you haven't seen?
Do you honestly expect this jury to believe that you haven't confronted your brother about all of this?
Yes, I do expect them to believe that I did not confront my brother, because I didn't.
Or maybe you don't need to, because you know the truth in this case. You already know it. That he went behind your back, right?
Did not happen.
Just like he has done with past boyfriends. He's done that in the past, where he's gone behind your back when you were having problems in a relationship and dealt with it himself.
No.
Now that's fascinating. And I would assume would come into evidence. There wasn't, I don't believe, evidence about that in Catherine Mabanawa's trial, but there was testimony hinting that Charlie had done this before with other boyfriends, perhaps, or other relationships that she had been in. But we didn't really get any detail. So I will be fascinated to see whether some of that comes into this trial, because the argument that the state will make is this was something Charlie regularly did. When he saw a little sis getting bullied or getting beaten around, not literally, but figuratively, when he saw that, he jumped into action, and he did that here when he killed Dan Markel. That'll be a theme, but it's just a little bit thrown out there to interest us.
You understand that until you expose your brother and explain what he did, that he went behind everybody's back, that he hired a hitman to murder your ex-husband, you'll remain guilty in the eyes of the world.
I can't speak to the eyes of the world. I can only know that I have done nothing wrong.
Now, the next little clip relates to some testimony, or at least to another witness in the case, Jeffrey Lacasse, who was Wendi Adelson's boyfriend after her divorce with Dan Markel, and up until the day, just about, of when Dan Markel was killed. And there's going to be a suggestion that she kept him around, and that she kept him around because she wanted somebody who might have been at fault for this murder, somebody who might have been jealous of Dan Markel. So we're going to see a little more of this.
Now, just for context, Jeffrey Lacasse, he was also an FSU professor, not at the law school, but an FSU professor. Nice guy, right?
I don't think so now.
You deny, I'm assuming, that on July 13, 2014, you told Jeffrey Lacasse that Charles looked into hiring a hitman. You deny that, or do you admit that?
I deny that.
and that you told him that Charles looked into hiring a hitman back in September of 2013.
That never happened.
Which would have been months before your brother even met Catherine McVanel, the week of the murder. You sent an email to Jeffrey Lacoste saying that you wanted to break up, that you needed space, right?
I did.
Sent him a long email, stay away, we're broken up, right?
I did.
You knew that on July 18, 2014, Jeffrey Lacoste was leaving town to go on a trip, right?
I knew he was leaving at some point that week. I don't remember when.
You knew that he was leaving on the same day of the murder at the same exact time as the murder.
I don't think I did.
11 a.m. on July 18, 2014.
I don't think I knew when he was leaving town.
It's a good way to put the blame onto somebody else. You'd agree on that, right? If it happened, it would have been a good way to put the blame on somebody else.
I have no idea when he was going to leave town.
So there was testimony from Jeffrey Lacoste that suggested, along with what the defense is suggesting here, that what she did was set up this boyfriend to take the fall. Maybe strung him along, really wasn't even interested in him, but kept him around so that it was all orchestrated. This murder would happen just as he was leaving town, and it would look like he did it and ran, something along those lines. And so that makes her look very cold, very calculated, and it makes it look very planned, because if all of that happened in coordination, the exact day, the hitmen, all of that, then that would suggest that there was a fair amount of planning that went into it. And all of that, I would imagine, would be things that the state wants to delve into in this next trial.
Let's jump off topic right now and talk about your boys' names. That in the time after the murder, you changed their last names from Markel to Adelson, right?
A year later, yes.
Why?
I was scared
Of what?
of someone coming to attack them.
Now, years later, arrests are made. It's clear who committed the murder, Sigfredo Garcia, Luis Rivera. The Adelson name has been dragged through the mud. Why haven't you continued to protect your boys and changed the name back?
I will be changing I'm not going to change the name back. I don't think that will help. One day I'll change all of our names.
I thought that was actually a pretty good answer on that one, that she would change all of their names, but it's still a pretty damaging fact. The fact that she changed their last name, separating them from the other family, and also the fact that the middle name was changed. I don't think the middle name fits this explanation. Changing the middle name would only make sense if she really wanted to insult somebody. It doesn't really make sense if what she's trying to do is protect them, because who knows their middle name anyway?
The government asked you about immunity, so let's get into that. You explained that as an attorney, you understand that when the government gives a subpoena for somebody to testify, that it conveys immunity, right?
That's my understanding. My knowledge of criminal law dates back to 2003 when I took a semester in law school, so forgive me.
So your understanding, though, is it doesn't mean they can't arrest you. They just can't use what you say here against you later on. So you're protected.
Correct.
And you needed that to testify, right?
It's just given to testify. It's not a question of whether I needed it. It comes with testifying.
You fear being charged by them, so you need to have that protection of
I
your
don't
words.
fear being charged for a crime I didn't commit, no.
Hopefully that, I saw a question run through the chat from Demi. Hopefully that answers the question you had about the immunity. So the immunity that she has does not protect her and does not keep this from ever being information that the government can internalize and use as it looks for information either against Charlie Adelson, Wendi, Donna, any of those people. But it can't be used against her, as if she is actually charged with the crime, they can't use that directly against her. And she's explaining what she understands it to mean now.
Now, the government asked you about the relationship, and you're like, we don't talk much. It's actually much deeper than that with Robert, isn't it?
We don't talk
At all.
at all.
So what happens
And
is...
I
is
better
that
explain this for a minute. Robert is another brother of hers. She says she used to be close to Robert. They don't really talk at all now. And the defense is going to get into why. Why don't you talk to that brother? What happened with that brother?
Robert is in love with a woman. Your parents object. He breaks up with her and then dates a Jewish woman, right?
And then they got married and divorced, and then he got back together with the person he wanted to be married to. Yes.
With his true love.
Yes.
But there was a lot of tension in your family because of your family's involvement in the kids' marriages, right?
Yeah.
So here, the defense is asking her about information about whether or not Donna Adelson has such a connection and control over her kids and wants such input into their lives that she's interfering with their love lives, with the relationships that they have. And of course, that's what the state's going to argue here. It was all about, in the end, Donna Adelson. And that's why Charlie acted. He was protecting his mother. He was protecting Wendi. And he acted because of that. And to answer Tom's question about what do the convicted three gain from testifying, I think what the convicted three gain will depend. There was already an agreement by Luis Rivera that he would cooperate. And that was part of what his initial deal was. Now, there is suggestion that maybe Catherine Mabanawa will testify in this case. So we don't have any idea yet what kind of deal has been offered to her or if that's even true since the trial hasn't started.
Yes.
Let's talk briefly about your children. You're currently planning a bat mitzvah for your oldest, right?
Nope, it already happened.
Did you invite Dan Markel's parents, the kids' grandparents?
I did.
You invited them?
I invited them, yes.
When was the last time they saw face-to-face their grandchildren?
April 20th,
Of this year?
just now.
And you agree with me that it had been years since 2006, the last time they had seen them.
The visit stopped when they threatened to put my children in foster care, yes.
For years, they weren't able to see their grandchildren despite their pleading to you to see them. But you let them, let me finish, but you let them hang out with your murdering brother, right?
The children were permitted to see their grandparents. I cooked for them. We had play dates. They had sleepovers. When a letter surfaced that they were trying to have my children placed in foster care, the visits stopped. My brother never threatened to put my children in foster care, and if he had, the visits would have stopped with him too.
Now, I found that to be overall a pretty convincing argument if, in fact, if that evidence gets offered that they tried to put them in foster care. But in the context of all of the disputes between the family and all of her efforts to separate the family, I think it's probably much more likely that, and just based on, and I'm talking about just based on what she's saying here, is I just listen to this. What seems to me is it's much more likely that she cut them off from the paternal grandparents as well, that she kept them from seeing Dan Markel's family, because you see so much around that. You see the change in the name, you see moving them somewhere else, you see the dispute related to the finances. And so all of that makes it seem to me more like she, in fact, was separating the kids from anything related to Dan Markel and their past on the father's side.
You know that your brother went behind your back, don't you?
I do not.
Like he always does. This is something that he has always done, isn't it?
Not.
So they really gave us no details in this testimony about that, but I'm really curious about whether anything will come out in this trial. Is there any sort of backup to that? I'm just curious.
You, as you mentioned, gave a police interview in this case, right?
Correct.
And consented to the search of your phone, etc. You gave testimony in this case, right?
Yes.
All right. And your parents did not, correct?
They did not give testimony.
They have not testified. They
They've
have
not been
not given a
asked to
police...
come testify, but they would if they were asked.
Okay. And have they given any police interviews?
I just have to stop for a minute. Did you hear the okay? Because we do know that there was a refusal by the parents to come testify, at least for this trial, and that they have been asked to submit to some kind of questioning beforehand from the state, and they said no. And so there was a standoff, and ultimately the resolution of it was, okay, fine. Donna and Harvey just won't come. They just won't be present.
They would have, but the police never contacted them.
The police did contact them, didn't they? And they refused.
No,
Are they represented by counsel?
they are represented by counsel.
And they'll come testify if we want them to.
If they are under state subpoena, just like I was, they would come testify.
All right. And do you know what they would testify to?
They would testify to whatever they know.
And do you know what they know?
I have no idea what they know.
They've never told you.
No,
You've never asked them
no.
because you never had any conversations with them about this murder.
I've been advised by my counsel not to.
All right, so nobody, including your brother Charlie, has admitted or denied to you any involvement in the murder one way or the other.
Correct.
All right, does that refresh your recollection?
And let me pull that out. So we get back to the question then, will Wendi Adelson testify in this trial? This trial is completely different for her. She barely knew Catherine Banawa, did not know the other two people, Sigfredo Garcia, at least we don't think, or Luis Rivera. So this is different. This is now a trial against her brother. Will she testify? Huge question. My view is yes, she's done it twice. It wasn't all that bad. She's already got the information out there but each time I will say it gets riskier. And could they use this? There was a question about whether or not they could use this testimony if she chooses not to testify. My personal view is probably not. The state probably couldn't. This is why I think that is because each party has the right to cross-examine the witnesses, to confront the witnesses against them. And in this particular case, if Wendi Adelson didn't show up and wasn't on the stand, then her brother, Charlie Adelson, would never have gotten the opportunity to cross-examine her. If this were offered against the state, well, the state was present, did have probably the same motivation to cross-examine her. Well, although they had her on direct. So I think it's probably unlikely that they could just play this tape. It would certainly be a huge battle in the case on whether they could. My personal view is probably not, because Charlie Adelson never had the chance to cross-examine his sister because he wasn't part of the other trials. He wasn't on trial. He didn't have counsel present. So that's my guess about what it would be the answer. And it raises a bigger question. What will happen to Wendi Adelson? Will she be prosecuted? Now, this particular testimony couldn't be used against her. So this particular testimony would not be directly used against her. But or somebody asked me that in our last live, and my answer was sort of, I'm unsure. We'll wait, we'll find out. But I want to take that a little further today. Having watched this and thought through what she said, I think this, if the prosecution wins against Charlie Adelson, I think they will charge Wendi Adelson. I think they for sure will charge Donna Adelson. They've already made comments that suggest they really do believe that they have a connection and are conspirators in the death of Dan Markel. They've already made statements like that in court. So I think they are slowly circling in, very, very slowly, in that Dan Markel was killed nearly 10 years ago now. So it's happening very slowly, but I think they're trying to build it piece by piece. Wendi is probably the most difficult to connect. There are conversations between Donna and Charlie that they can talk about, connections there. Charlie has the videotape where he was talking to Catherine Banawa, but what's more difficult is pulling Wendi in other than by motive. So I think they're trying to build that bit by bit. We'll see. It's a super interesting question. So let me go through real quickly and see if there are any questions that people were asking that I can go back and answer. I saw that one that I mentioned earlier. Can they, well, Demi asked that question and I actually just answered that question. That's my personal opinion as to how it would work out. Let's see if there's anything else. Okay, I'm seeing it looks like I've answered most of the questions, hopefully. I went back a little ways. Hopefully I got just about everything. Now, tomorrow is going to be the opening statements in this case. So what we're going to do is go live again tomorrow night, extra bonus live. We're going to be trying to go live every night during the trial at 7 p.m., just like we are now. And we're going to be talking about the opening statements. What does the defense say? What does the prosecution say? Where do they seem to be headed in this case? So be sure to subscribe because you don't want to miss the opening statements and talking about the case. This is an absolutely fascinating case. I want to say thank you to our moderators, Marlon and mamapinks. If you would, please be sure to hit the like button on your way out, and I will see you tomorrow night at 7 o'clock Eastern.